Thanks. I use this. It's okay. All right. Thank you very much. So today we will talk about IPv6 implementation and launch at LinkedIn, how we organized ourselves, key challenges we faced, and we'd also be happy to share some data towards the end on what our members see from an IPv6 perspective and how we see members from an IPv6 perspective. So when you're supporting infrastructure for sort of any large-scale web content provider like ourselves, one can implement IPv6 in many aspects of infrastructure, example, networks, systems. But if the application is not served by v6, it really doesn't matter because you haven't made that giant leap to get IPv6 eyeballs into your networks. So at the end of the day, you want the picture of your website to look like this with a little 6 on the end in your Chrome browser. So we started talking about IPv6 back in 2011 at LinkedIn. And we formed an infrastructure-focused working group because we knew that the infrastructure has to first fully support v6 before we're able to get any of the application folks on board. So we had, let me go back. Sorry, I missed one. So anyway, so we had to actually get everybody on board. The biggest challenge for us was to make sure that we were able to mobilize the software teams, the data teams, and a lot more folks. We also needed to evangelize across the company, and this was the biggest challenge on our part. So at this point, I had to look for somebody to help me sort of move away from the infrastructure side and focus on the application side. So I found none other than the wonderful Stephanie Schuler, who came on board to help me sort of expand the task force and make it a lot bigger. Stephanie also has the amazing ability to convince people how to show up to meetings because she can bribe folks with her baking skills. So this is the reason why we have pie on our slides, if you're wondering. So I'll hand it over to Stephanie now. Yeah.
Thanks, Zaid. Yes, I came in when we were ready to tackle the other half, the messy half. This is the half where you have to bring in the whole rest of the company and have them do their part for IPv6. Here are just some of the areas that you have to deal with. You can see the range of them. Pretty much every team in the technical organizations at LinkedIn had some kind of work to do. This is hundreds of people. I can understand why web companies are really lagging in adopting IPv6. It's not technically difficult, but it's an enormous amount of work. So at this point, the IPv6 task force was born. We put out a call, and people who were proponents of IPv6 from all over the company came and joined the task force. And then there were some people who just joined for the baking. We had this, at some of the meetings, we had this extra guy who would show up, didn't have any role except to eat snacks. So, email came first. It came first because Frank Martin just went ahead and did it. Anyone know Frank? He spoke here last year about email. Nobody had to tell him to go ahead and work on IPv6. He's such a true believer. The rest of this took 10 months. It was 7 months for the work, then 3 months for the pilot. In this case, LinkedIn culture really helped us because in LinkedIn culture, you can just go ahead and do things. You don't have layers of approval and all of that kind of stuff. So we were able to move fast. 10 months, 7 months plus 3 months. This can give you an idea of how long it takes to put a website onto IPv6 if you have no delays. So here's what we did. We decided to enable IPv6 on the edge. All of the traffic coming into LinkedIn goes through Apache Traffic Server. That's an open source proxy and caching server. We've used that for years, so that element was not new. Basically, ATS just works as a simple proxy here. The incoming v6 connection is terminated at ATS. Then ATS speaks to the application behind over v4. However, the application needs to know the end user's IP address. So ATS passes that along as a header. Now, this is where all the problems happen. This is where all of those groups that I just listed have to do their work. Something that I wanted to explain is this, is for a website, IPv6 as transport is not a problem. IPv6 as a piece of data, that is the work. That is the problem. Sometimes when I talk to infrastructure people, they don't get it. They're like, well, transport, what could be that hard? But it's this bit as a piece of data. So what's happening is it's going into databases. It's going into data analytics. It has a different format. It's too long, so it gets truncated. That's where all the work is. So this is the hard part with any IPv6 implementation, and websites are no different. It's competing priorities. With IPv6, you can't just launch. You can't be 99% ready. You have to be completely ready to go, because stuff is going to break if you put IPv6 addresses in databases, or use it in data analytics, or use it with your security and abuse screening. You can't just go ahead and say, well, let's just launch, because every minute, every hour that a website goes down costs us enormous amounts of money. I can't just decide to wing it like that. So you have to get every team, those hundreds of people, to all prioritize their work. However, you're going to face reality. I mean, IPv6 is a non-revenue project. It's also, you've got to compete with user-facing features. IPv6 is a feature that nobody even notices. And then it's not the only tech initiative that's going on at the company. So we had full support from top management. LinkedIn is a very tech-forward company. They were really gung-ho about IPv6, but we still had to do a lot of justification work, not to top management, but to all of these groups who already had a lot on their plate. People asked, well, why not delay? They weren't against IPv6, they just wanted to do it later. So it's a fair question. So here are 5 reasons that we found resonated with people. The first, most effective one was our peers are doing it already. Thank you, Facebook. Thank you. The second one was really effective with management. It was this. Our entire business model relies on the internet. We don't have stores. We don't have stuff. We don't mail out discs in red envelopes. If we don't keep up with internet technology, then what kind of business strategy is that? Okay, Third one is it'll be harder later when we're bigger. Fourth is mobile is going IPv6. You can't hold back market forces. And the last one was security problems with IPv4, the CGNAT. So you have to evangelize. You've got to evangelize twice as much as you think you do. I spent the first 2 months about half time just evangelizing. I made videos and showed them at company all hands. I gave out T-shirts. I visited teams, just all kinds of things. Yes, I learned how to make caramel and fudge, and yes. Okay, here's what you do when you're going to be dealing with an application. You've got to examine all your data flows. This is a full audit of your data flows, and actually the tech managers thought this was a big benefit because you find crud in there that has nothing to do with IPv6. So we sent out a questionnaire that I wrote that has the basic use cases that would require somebody to do work on IPv6. You know, things like I use geolocation, I store it in a database, or I allow peer-to-peer communication. These kinds of things. There's a long list of screening questions. So 80% of the work turned out to be trivial, things like upgrading a library, running some tests. But we found 3 areas that needed big work. First one was the data type. For IPv6 addresses, do you use string or do you use binary? Second one, IP-based geolocation for IPv6, as many of you know, and as Zaid is going to tell you more about, it's insufficient. And the third one is security on IPv6. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Zaid, who will tell you more about these challenges and our launch, and then share some results that we got after we launched.
Thank you. Thanks, Steph. So our biggest challenge in terms of actual code change we had to make was really about the conversion from string to binary. So I want to talk a little bit about this. This was the large chunk of work that we had to do. So historically, you know, at LinkedIn, developers just stored IP addresses as string. And it's just something that they didn't really think much about the future and what we had, what kind of consequences it would have. But when we started to actually tackle V6 problems, we said, well, we have to decide here what's actually the best path to take in the future we want to live in, right? So some of the problems that we sort of encountered, right? One of them was we have now 300-400 different services in our stack, and all of them have these offline jobs. And when we made the conversion, when we moved from string to binary, we have to make sure that there's no disruption on these jobs because they are very critical back-end business functions. Then, if we stored it in string, how do we deal with multiple representations in text format, right? These are some things we discussed. The multiple address issues in IPv6, and if you combine that with existing IPv4, now you have to have range, and then brute force starts to become challenging. So we all sat around a table and said, okay, we have some key decisions to make. We got all the key stakeholders in different parts of the engineering group, the folks who deal with data. We have actually a data group that decides, the correct way to actually format things. And we said, okay, what do we want to do? Fundamentally, do we want to change from string to binary? Of course. This is the right thing to do. So this is if anyone here is actually from a content company storing IP addresses, this is definitely a must for you guys to do. And you do it by using byte array. What do you do with the fields? Do you create a new one? Do you modify the current one? our recommendation is, you actually should add, so that you don't have to go in and one day say, okay, I'm going to change it all on the fly, and disrupt your pipelines. Then what do you do with the v4 that's still going to come for a while? Well, you should be doing that as binary as well, because then you don't have to maintain two different things, and plus, once the transition is finished, then you can deprecate the old one. And then there's the mapping side. So data analytics people still want a way to figure out how to tell that it's a v6 address, and how to how that actually relates to the old v4 side. So we decided to do fixed length addressing for them, so it really makes it sort of easier for them. So when we were actually discussing this, we actually reached out to a bunch of people in the community. So I want to thank Jason Fessler and Paul Saab from Facebook for giving us some advice on how they did solve these problems, so that we could kind of do the same thing. So I want to talk a little bit about how we do that string to binary transition, what was our method, and maybe what other folks can also use. So the way we kind of tackle this is we added a new byte array field that both contain v4 and v6. So it's something like this. And we decided that for backward compatibility, we'll just retain the existing string and continue to do the v4 on that side. But we would write v4 to both the fields, the old and the new, and then we would write the v6 only to the new field. So if you guys use a pipeline system, you can figure out a way to inject from your front end back to your back end. We use Kafka, obviously, because we built it, so that worked pretty well for us. And then, there's also this question, what do you do with the old v4? So we actually went back and we found that nobody really touched data before 2 years. So we did a mark on it, and we said, okay, if we'll support it up to 2 years, and we actually migrated all those. And then we reached out to all the data people for all the 300 plus services and says, hey, start modifying your jobs, write your scripts, and then you can still use both fields. You don't have to actually kill the old one, but at some point we'll send out some notifications so you can deprecate the field when there's nothing on it. So this is really really how we actually migrated. The second biggest problem we had that we had to deal with was IP-based geolocation. So sales actually, when we talked to the salespeople, they were very adamant that, hey, if you guys move to v6, make sure that the embargo stuff works, because there's certain countries that can't sell in, and it makes sales harder if they don't have any visibility to that. The other one is abuse blocking, which is very important for our site. We want to make sure that we can, at an ASN level, block folks. And then there's additional, sales and marketing related people who wanted city level data for analytics. So we spent a bit of time actually researching, what's the right way to do, and I don't really have very good news actually. What we found out is that country level is really good. ASN view is really terrible. Doesn't give a lot of stuff. We had to come up with our own way of building something that used org data to kind of translate back to ASN, which is a little bit of a hack. It works, but it is what it is. We went down to 2 vendors. I'm not going to shame them, but basically coverage was roughly the same. My recommendation here is to the community, push these guys, make sure that we can get better data on GeoIP going forward. Security was the other challenge. Site abuse handling is important. So before we went launch, it was a must that we actually resolve all the abuse side. It was a huge dependency. So on the ATS side, as Stephanie had mentioned, there was a bit of work we did actually to handle all the abuse, and we tested it out so we could block v6 addresses at various levels, doing back off and things like that. I want to thank Eric Venke for helping us out here on the security side. Gave a lot of great advice there. So I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about the launch. So we attacked the launch in kind of phases. So first is we said we're going to do a pilot where we just want to turn on and off v6 for a while. And the whole reason why we want to do this is we want to find out if anything really broke. And the biggest thing we want to give is people experience. We found that a lot of people were nervous. Oh, what if DNS doesn't behave this way? What if this doesn't happen? What if our CDNs do something differently? So we said, okay, we just do an on and off test. Simple. You just do nothing else but turn it on for a while and turn it off. You don't have to do fix forward or anything like that. So we did this for DNS. We found some new things we learned on the monitoring side, some operational things, and then we said, okay, now people feel confident. Let's fix some of the things. And on 7.7 we said, okay, now we're going to do another test, but let's make this test a little bit more comprehensive. So not just www.linkedin. We actually went and did mobile and API, and then we said, let's test multiple colos at the same time. Because we're never going to serve from one colo. So we turned off we didn't do the CDN piece because we already had figured it out in the first part. But we actually had, mobile carrier testing and all these things happening, and we were able to flush out any of the bugs that we were doing. And multi-colo was a big one for us at that time. Then on the third one, we said, well, we need to do another test, because in the first two tests, they were only 3 hours each. So there's all the stuff I talked about, string to binary conversion. Those things we couldn't really massively test until you actually do almost a 2-day run, right? So we chose a 40-hour period so that from Asia to Europe, sunrise to sunset, we could get enough data to test fully how IPs sort of went down deep in the stack and if it really broke anything. And in this test, we actually didn't find anything really broken. We actually ended up just getting a lot of data to actually verify that V6 was working very well. Then once we were done, we were ready for the launch. And the only reason that held our launch was the fact that there was a public holiday. It's Labor Day, right, I believe? Yeah, so that's why we kind of waited until September to actually do the launch. And I think everyone here saw the announcements on the press. So what happens after? Now the fun stuff happens. So I wanted to share some data. And basically we saw that overall we had about little over 3% of our traffic is being served via V6. Russia was one of our highest from the eastern side of Europe. On the other side of Europe, Belgium and the Czech Republic were one of the top V6 visits. US was a little above 6%. In South America, actually surprising, it was for us it was Peru, considering that Brazil is one of our largest markets, but Peru was actually one of our top visits. And in Asia, Malaysia was actually was pretty high up there. And then I wanted to show some data on ASNs that just came with us purely on V6. So Orange Poland recently I found is 100% V6 for us. And in Asia it's HiNet and some other networks that you can read. Then we wanted to show some data on the top ASNs, and we found a lot of community colleges. This is, by the way, just a small sample. I have much larger data that I'm happy to share if people want specifics. But basically, colleges came up and universities came up as top. Verizon Wireless came for us pretty high, as well as T-Mobile, up there. And I think this is largely because of the mobile side. Cloudflare actually showed up pretty high up there for us, and Hurricane Electric. So that's another one. I'll talk about Comcast later.
Stephanie,
so the mobile data was very interesting. Sorry?
Sorry, Zaid, you
Yes.
got 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. So the mobile piece is very interesting. We tried to compare between Android and iOS. US, we saw like almost, it's like 32% Android by V6 and iOS was 19. In some countries, you can see they're closer. So I'd love for people to give feedback on why they think this is the way it is. Then Stephanie was actually saying, hey, how about we look at weekday versus weekend? So we actually ran like, how does V6 look for us from a weekday versus weekend perspective? Because LinkedIn, people use it sort of, they go to work, they use LinkedIn in a specific way, then they go home and they may be using it in a specific way. Belgium is one of our top visits, but as you can see, the enterprise side is lagging behind. The cable modem side is actually doing a lot better on the residential side. So if you look at all this data, we found basically that enterprise is much slower, right, in moving to V6. May not be a surprise to a lot of people, but we wanted to show it here. Some countries where it's actually pretty even is like Sweden, Austria, Singapore, and Malaysia, and the Netherlands are pretty even. But I think this is, and if you drill down, so the US is about half. So in the US, it kind of looks like this. Like in the middle of the week, it's like roughly about 8%. Then people go home, and the V6 usage is much higher. So this kind of speaks to the enterprise versus the Comcast rollout. There you go. I said Comcast. Anyway, I want questions. Please go ahead. Yeah.
This is James Woodyard. On one of your slides, you said that you use V4 mapped addresses to represent IPv4 addresses with a 16-byte array, and I wondered why you used V4 mapped and not V4 compat.
The question is why I use V4 map versus not V4.
The V4 compat form.
Because this is our data side, right? So the data analytics people preferred the mapping. We went through various things. They just had a preference for it. There wasn't any real like deep technical discussion. They just wanted to do the mapping because at some stage we know that we're going to deprecate it. So that was kind of our reasoning. Nothing like too technical. Yeah.
I think Mark's got a question and Sander. Somebody got a mic?
Yeah, I have a question. I asked the same question to Facebook, basically, but I was wondering if you have the same experience. About costs. We saw that the majority of the work was in software. Would you say that also the majority of the cost for the whole project was in the resources to develop new software or adjust the current software, or did it go somewhere else?
Do you want to take that?
I could take that
Yeah,
one.
sure.
With the infrastructure, we did that over, what, a couple of years?
Yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah.
So with the regular replacements of equipment, we could fold that in. With
Software costs.
With software, that's where we had costs. We had labor costs. However, we didn't track it.
I mean, it's just basically people's time and all that, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the company looked at it very differently. It's forward-thinking technology. People at LinkedIn are motivated by a lot of the people that came to the table were self-motivated. They did not need to be dragged in. Yeah, in the end, we had to drag in a couple of people, but that's really, that's just a way, to kind of do some stuff around. But really, it's people's time. That's all it was. Yeah.
So Mark?
How about performance difference between V4 and V6? We saw some of that from Paul.
Yes.
You got any data?
So I would have loved to show the data. I think next time, if I'm presenting, I would have more data. I have data that I haven't fully verified, but yes, we are actually seeing. I could say that from a desktop perspective, which probably isn't that interesting these days, it's about 7 to 10% difference. V6 actually performs better. Yes. So we see some things, but I think we are actually more interested in the mobile side. I was talking to Paul yesterday about the same thing. Yeah.
I was going to ask just, so are you done now? And if not, what's next?
So we are largely done from a mobile API desktop perspective. On the edge, we are done. Other people just kind of bring their services online. The acquisitions and all that. What's next, to answer your question, is V6 only inside the data center, because we're building a lot more data centers now, and we're actually having challenges on V4. Running out actually internally. So that's our next step. Yeah. Question is, any features on the user side for V6 or? No, we just kind of everything uses V6. We don't distinguish anything. Like I said, everything is under www.linkedin.com. So all our products support V6. Yeah.
So on slide number 9, you had this checklist of do you use literal addresses, stuff like that?
Yes.
Can we have the full list as a start of a BCOP document?
Yes. Yes. Yep. I can send that to you.
Please.
Please share it with everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. We'd be happy to share it. Yeah.
Guys,
It was very useful because it's all written in lay language. These are people who never normally ever deal with the network. And it's surprisingly complete.
So, Stephanie, Zaid, thank you very much indeed for a very
I
interesting
still have a question.
discussion. Can we